Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. Today I'm going to talk about the platitude, the perfect is the enemy of the good. This comes, I put out a request for subjects, and Elias Jones had suggested platitude, so I'm going to try tackling one each time to keep them a little shorter than I normally would do. So, the perfect is the enemy of the good. Is it? Well, it's kind of interesting because there is a practical sense in which the meaning of this is very accurate, and the perfect is the enemy of the good. And there's another sense, a deeper sense, in which the perfect also is the enemy of the good. And then a sort of more technical sense in which this is complete nonsense and the perfect and the good are in fact the same thing, and so they can't possibly be enemies. So that's probably actually the least interesting of them. So I'm going to start on the first side. When we say the perfect is the enemy of the good, what is actually meant by this? Well, it's meant that the unattainable is the enemy of the attainable. And that is obviously true. When people say the perfect is the enemy of the good, what they mean is that in this fallen world, there are things we can't accomplish. And if you insist on trying to accomplish what cannot be accomplished, you are going to fail to accomplish it, and worse, you will fail more than if you try to accomplish what is in fact accomplishable. So, to take a very simple example of this, suppose you wish to build a 50-story card tower. So you've got the cards and you stack them up and up and up. And let's suppose that you only have the skill to build a 4-story card tower. Well, what's going to happen when you build your 4-story card tower and leave it there? You might well have a card tower. What happens when you keep on going and insist, I'm going to get all the way up to 50, and then you've exceeded your skill and the thing's going to collapse? And then you have nothing. And then you try again, and you keep on going and collapse. And you try again, keep on going and collapse. And so what is happening here? The perfect is the enemy of the good, in the sense of your ideal of this 50 card tower is preventing you from building a 4-story tower that actually stands. What's going on here at a more philosophical level? Well, what you're actually doing, because the standard phrasing, though succinct, is actually kind of misleading, is that you are dealing not with the situation in front of you, but with the situation you wish you were dealing with. This, by the way, is one of those great insights of Taoism. There's the wonderful story of Chef Ding, is told by, I think it's Chuang Tzu, where Chef Ding was the chef, and he was a Taoist, and the king called him, or governor or something, called him in and said, "What is the Tao?" And Chef Ding said, "Well, when I carve up an animal, I go through, when I come, I pass my knife through, when I come up to a complex structure, usually this means joints of bones, I pause and I consider the shape of it, and then I pass my knife through the shape of it. And then, I don't force my way through, but pass my knife through where there isn't force." Now, if you've ever butchered an animal, by the way, joints often have complex shapes to them. They don't just they're not like two balls that meet up to each other, but like they actually sort of have interlocking shapes because they're actually meant to fit each other. And then they will have tendons that connect. There'll be tendons that go across them. There will be ligaments that actually connect these things to each other. And if you try to simply make straight cuts, you never actually go through the stuff that's relatively easy to cut, like tendons and ligaments. What you end up doing is forcing your way through cartilage, and most of the time through bone. Now, this is very dulling on a knife. So in the story of Chef Ding, he goes on to say, a bad chef needs a new knife every month. A good chef needs a new knife every year. I've had this same knife for 20 years and never needed to sharpen it. That is the Tao. That is to say, that he, by the way, there's an interesting book I still haven't read, but for anyone who might object to me citing Taoism, a fascinating book called Christ the Eternal Tao, that argues that Taoism is a proto-evangelion, like Greek philosophy, a thing in natural philosophy wherein God, through his grace, gave it to people to lay the groundwork so they would be able to accept the evangelion, or the good news. Anyway, so it's a fabulous story to describe the difference between dealing with what is actually in front of you and dealing with what you wish was in front of you. Because the bad chef wishes that he just had like a joint that was like a completely flat thing where he can just put his knife straight through and hey, there you go, no problems of any kind. And the thing is, if you try to do that, even with like tendons and ligaments, forcing a knife straight down, because knives, when you look at them, come to incredibly thin edges at the bottom, that's what lets them cut. That sort of action, even if you had a joint that just looked like that, with some connective tissue in between, is going to be bad for your knife, because what's going to start to happen is that hyperfine edge, because at the edge of a well-sharpened knife, it might only be like a few atoms thick, it'll start to wobble in different ways, and so you'll get it wobbling back and forth. This is, by the way, why you have that thing that you go like this with. You're not sharpening it by removing material. You're literally just straightening out that edge. That's why you draw it backwards rather than towards the knife. Even connective tissues like tendons, if you just force your way straight through, you will dull the edge of the knife because you're going to be bending this thing that's a few atoms thick. That's why like a drawing motion works better, because that of its nature is it's changing which portion, it's not forcing stuff over as much. There's some other mechanical advantages going on. So even a drawing motion will be better, if you had that thing. But when you look at what these things actually look like, you have to get your knife around, and your knife is a strange shape for the shape of the joints that you're trying to cut. And so you have to know what the thing is very well, and then get your knife in, making it trace out this very strange shape that you're moving. In so doing, you do draw cuts along the way where you're not forcing your knife through anything that's tough, and your knife will stay much, much sharper, and you will cut things across much, much, much more cleanly, requiring far less force than, say, taking a giant meat cleaver, which is essentially like a wood felling axe that you just happen to be using on bone instead of wood. Because that is the alternative. You see that, you just giant chunks of metal that aren't very sharp and just use enormous amounts of force, and that will work. It's tremendously more work than doing something specific to what's in front of you, but at the very least, you have a tool which is meant for this sort of blunt force that you're using. Well, what's the point in terms of the perfect being the enemy of the good? Here, the perfect being what you wish was actually here, and the good being the best that can be accomplished with what is actually real, the thing that's actually in front of you, as opposed to the thing that you have in your mind that you just wish was the case. And so this is the sense in which the perfect is the enemy of the good, and the actually philosophically accurate version of it is that you accomplish much better results dealing with what is than what you wish was. And just what you wish was the case is the perfect, and what you can actually accomplish with what is in front of you is the good. These should not be confused, by the way, with ideals like love, charity, justice, mercy. These are ideals, or the perfect, in a very different sense. These are not things that, like, I wish there was this thing in front of me. This is rather, because justice can always be accomplished. Mercy can always be accomplished. Charity can always be accomplished. The particular form of charity will vary with what is in front of you. It will look very different depending upon what you have to give and the ability of the person to whom you want to give to receive. But you giving as much as you can that the other person is capable of receiving is, in fact, perfect. Therefore, in the sense of, without flaw. You have to distinguish perfect without flaw from perfect maximal of good, like maximum good. Because, of course, in that sense, nothing other than God can be perfect, because we're all finite. But we can all be perfect in the sense of without flaw. Perfectly, are finite, without flaw, what we are, in fact, supposed to be. And so in this case, where you give as much as you can that the other person is capable of receiving, you don't give less than that, you don't give more than that, but give the actual amount that person is capable of receiving that you are capable of giving, this is the good, which is the opposite of the perfect, which would be attempting to give more than you have, or attempting to give what they're not capable of receiving. That would be the perfect in this circumstance, and the perfect would be essentially wishing your God. And wishing your God is very much the opposite and the enemy of being good. So, and that kind of covers, by the way, the final thing, wherein the perfect is the enemy of the good is nonsense, in the sense of perfect being without flaw is the enemy of the good, because for something to be good, it doesn't have flaws. Now, you can be partially good and partially flawed, so there's good, but also flaws. But that's simply conflating multiple aspects of a complex thing, where you have, you can be good at chess and bad at checkers, and so like you have some good in you, but you also have portions of you that are flawed. That's because you're complex. That's just conflating different things, and not taking the trouble of saying what you actually mean specifically. So not in that sense, but in the sense of you can't be good at chess and also not able to play chess. That would be a contradiction. So when you say, and especially when you say the good, you tend to be you often can accidentally invoke the idea of the Platonic ideals, the Platonic forms. So the good in this sense would very much be exactly the same as the perfect, in that Platonic ideal sort of sense of things. But those aren't very interesting because most people don't tend to talk in that way. And this is what that phrase actually is. And to the degree that it means that you need to deal with what actually is rather than the convenient thing that you wish for, especially if that thing is you being God, it's a really, really good idea to deal with that thing instead of what you wish for. And as long as everyone understands that what you mean by the perfect is the enemy of the good is deal with what actually is, deal with reality instead of your fantasies, well, that really is a very good idea. Until next time, may you hit everything you aim at,